Hello. Hello, hello, hello. Check, 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 check. I hope I'm with you. I hope you're with me. Thanks, everybody, for joining me. In case you're wondering if this is your first time joining in the past week, Lee Camp is in Tibet. And I know that sounds like the start of a joke, but it's true. He is in Tibet. And so I've taken over while he's gone a couple of times a week. And so really stoked to be hanging out with y'all. And please hit like, hit share, hit whatever else it is that you hit in order to get this out into the world. Thanks. I've already been reading some of your comments. Thanks so much for already getting the conversation going. Please share your comments. I will try to see them and comment on them as much as possible. I'm still learning how to do all of the things at once. Some people are asking if I'm going to talk about peanut squirrels. I'm not really sure how to answer that question. I wasn't planning on talking about peanuts or squirrels, but you know, I'm open. James asks if I'm going to talk about Waltz's campaign mishaps in Navajo Nation. I didn't hear about them, but please do share in the chat. I have purposefully not heard or looked at any of the things that Waltz, Harris, Vance, or Trump are doing because I like to keep my dinner down. That being said, I am going to get into how this is all your fault, and mine too, you know, because it's never the politicians' fault, right? The shitstorms that we exist in, whether that be ecocide, genocide, the lack of basic human rights, it's not their fault, okay? If we could just understand that it's all our fault, things would get a lot better. And so I'm going to get into that. Of course, going to talk about what's been going on in the genocide, because that's obviously still happening, escalating, even when you didn't think it was possible to escalate anymore. And so, Patchouli Diver is saying Peanut is was a guy's pet that the state killed. It was a pet squirrel. Karen reported it and the cops killed it. As I oftentimes say to Lee, I don't know if you're fucking with me right now, but if you're not, that's, that's on brand, right? So I'm sorry that Peanut the Squirrel did not make it into today's live stream, but I'm glad that we're commemorating Peanut the Squirrel in the chat. Okay, gonna dive right in here to something far darker than Peanut the Squirrel, because that's how I roll, okay? You come here for the darkness. So Al Jazeera reported this. This is from yesterday. We're recording this on November 4th. Yesterday was the 3rd. I can do math. Over 50 children killed in Israeli strikes in Gaza's Jabalia in just 48 hours. And this is what I posted. I posted this on my Instagram with, you know, the line, "Don't you dare tell me that this is the lesser of two evils." Children, of course, have been a major target, not least of all because so many of the people in Gaza are, in fact, children. Moving on from that, there is this was a report by, it's put together by a few different folks, including the Human TI Project, quoting Louise Waterridge from Unarwa, which is now banned in the West Bank, or banned in Israeli territory, quote unquote. Today has been one of the worst days I've experienced in Gaza. That's November 1st and 2nd. Over the past 24 hours, Israel has intensified its bombardment of the Nuseirat in central Gaza. At least 39 people have been killed in the last day, with many more injured and trapped beneath the rubble. Among those killed was a 1-month-old baby. Buildings, and this is a report from Palestinian journalist Tarek Abu Azoum, states that there has been a significant intensification of artillery attacks alongside aerial bombardment by Israeli fighter jets, as well as drones that continue to pursue civilians in Nuseirat. So again, people are not just getting hit by bombs, there are actually like quadcopters and drones that will follow people around and stalk them. This is what happened to Sinwar. This is something that is common use with the Israeli military. So they will follow civilians around and assassinate them. And so you're not safe in a building. You're not safe outside of a building, which is of course the whole point. The Israelis have figured out how to do genocide in a very, very streamlined, almost like factory floor kind of workflow. Journalist Tarek Abu Azum continues, buildings are packed with civilians desperate for any kind of shelter. This overcrowding is compounding the suffering caused by Israel's strategic attacks on civilian buildings. And Louise Waterridge, again, senior emergency officer for UNRWA, said there's no food available. It is very, very difficult for families on the ground. The situation has become so dire that once again, we are seeing people fighting over bags of flour or remaining cans of food. Less and less humanitarian aid is being allowed into Gaza. No water has been allowed into northern Gaza since October 1st. As Hossam Shabbat writes here, the northern Gaza Strip remains under heavy bombardment, and I have heard from my contact in central Gaza that central Gaza has been under escalated heavy bombardment. So just breaking it down here I hate to say bullet points, but that's what they're called. Attacks on residential buildings in the north have killed 84, including over 50 children. That's the story from Al Jazeera that I started with. In Jabalia refugee camp, many remain trapped under rubble. Heavy bombardment in Nusrat refugee camp over the last 24 hours has killed at least 39 and injured dozens more. Severe food shortages in central Gaza have led to people fighting for basic supplies. Occupation forces continue raids across the West Bank. I think it's easy to forget that while this genocide is happening, there is an extreme escalation of violence in the West Bank, and even outside of that, in places like Hebron and things like that. So because so many people are understandably focused on Gaza, we tend to forget that Israel is not just focusing their violence on Gaza there. I mean, obviously there's Lebanon too, but I mean, just in terms of the Palestinian experience, the West Bank it is a very dangerous place. I mean, it has been, but in an escalated way. Medical supplies that were delivered to Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza were destroyed by Israeli airstrikes just 5 days after their arrival. And this comes at a time when Israel is also not allowing any medical professionals into Gaza. Polio vaccinations to continue today in northern Gaza, though only in Gaza City, excluding areas like Jabalia and Beit Lahia due to ongoing attacks on civilians. Again, they are assassinating and stalking civilians through the streets. Armed settlers attacked Palestinian olive pickers near Salfit, threatening them to abandon their lands. Israel's finance minister stated that Gaza must be reoccupied, with the Israeli military remaining for years. This is the lived reality of Gaza and indeed the West Bank right now. And Sir Edward Ross writes, I'm starting to think that the Nazis just moved to Palestine. There's a lot of the repetition, right? Never again, not just in terms of who is oppressed became a joke, but never again who the oppressor is became a joke as well on the lips of Zionists. And there's actually a really great song by the anti-Zionist klezmer musician Daniel Kahn about nakam, which is the Hebrew word for revenge. I recommend that people check that out. And yeah, and to quote James Baldwin, I think that people hold so tightly onto hate because they're afraid of confronting their pain. So I wanted to, again, please hit like, share, whatever the things are that you hit to share and get this out into the world. I wanted to share this by It's kind of shameless self-promotion, but not really. I'm part of Project Censored, but I did not have anything to do with this brilliant post. Project Censored on Instagram does great work, and I wanted to share that with y'all. These are 5 stories censored by corporate media this week, and I'm just going to share the first 2, actually. This was posted 4 days ago. The UN basically said that the entire population of North Gaza is at risk of dying. UN official Joyce Masua warns Israel's ongoing assault on northern Gaza could lead to mass civilian deaths, with the entire population at risk. Now, of course, there have already been mass civilian deaths, but this is also kind of like that UN speak, you know? They're not going to say this is fucking genocide, stop it. They have their own way of talking, which I often think is lame, but and not harsh enough. Israel has targeted hospitals, shelters, detaining health workers, which I mentioned, destroying medications, and leaving nearly 250,000 people without healthcare access in the north, which, by the way, they didn't really have it to begin with. So, you know, like the ability to access proper healthcare in Gaza, like 4 years ago, 10 years ago, was already, to reuse the word, lame at best. You know, if people needed serious treatments for things, they had to get permission to do so, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not like they had really accessible healthcare anyway. Israel's actions have killed hundreds, displaced tens of thousands, and forcibly separated families, with men and boys taken away by the truckload. People have probably seen video and pictures of this already, but they're separating families, oftentimes by gender, sometimes just kind of willy-nilly, and then they'll just scatter them. So you are forcibly ripped from your family, and then forced to move, and you have no idea where your kids are, where your parents are, where your siblings, your cousins, whatever. And this is, of course, it's like, it's not enough to kill people. They have to torture people physically, mentally, emotionally. This is the kind of extreme terrorist behavior that this genocide is taking on, that Israel's using, this sadistic, like you honestly couldn't even think of such horrific shit, and they do it. And so this is an example of that. Another story that was censored by the corporate media: the Israeli-American businessman pitching a $200 million plan to deploy more mercenaries to Gaza. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the American connection to the IOF in a moment. Israel plans to establish gated communities, which I think we call concentration camps. So, yeah, the way that corporate media is talking about these concentration camps, of which Gaza has been and is one, but they're literally calling it gated communities, like it's like some kind of luxurious place. Israel plans to establish gated communities in Gaza, intensifying surveillance and control by requiring civilians to undergo biometric screening to access humanitarian aid. I think Lee might have mentioned this or talked about this before he left, but this is, I mean, again, Orwell like wished he could have come up with this dystopian shit for his novel 1984. But this is where we're at, right? Israeli-American businessman Moti Kahana's US-based security company, GDC, backs the proposal aiming to create humanitarian bubbles. I mean, what the shit kind of language is this? How the fuck dare you call it these things? What the fuck is a humanitarian bubble? You piece of shit monsters. This would allow total oversight of Palestinian lives with these restricted zones. And this is when they've already been under total surveillance, because Gaza is the most surveilled place on the planet. Yes, I mean, doubling down on slaughter isn't telling enough. Yeah, Mark says, leave it to the media and the Israelis to characterize their open-air prison as a gated community. Yeah, exactly. This is the kind of doublespeak that they're, you know, in order to sanitize a genocide. Omar says the word humanitarian has lost all meaning. Exactly. It's kind of like how Obama, like hope and change, and now joy. Harris has ruined the word joy. So, GDC intends to deploy personnel trained in both non-lethal and lethal force, equipped for crowd management and escalation, positioning itself as a high-tech occupation force with broad authority to respond at will. GDC's partnership with Constellus, which is Blackwater's successor, reinforces the plan's authoritarian approach, using aid as a tool for control rather than assistance. Now, and critics warn that this gated approach could turn Gaza into a high-tech concentration camp, which it already was, just not as high-tech, leveraging humanitarian needs to surveil, restrict, and control the population under a security pretext. That's fucking horrifying. Now, this actually is something that we have in our own history here in the United States because, you know, we share these fascistic ideas amongst friends. This kind of using aid or food, basic human needs, to force a population into doing what you want is something that the United States government has done with indigenous populations. And for instance, to move them off of their land, they said, hey, go to this fort, there's food there. And so they basically starve them out and then force people to move to this fort. Once they were on that fort, they could never, of course, return to their lands. And a lot of them were massacred or forced into boarding schools once they got to the fort. So this is something that the US has done and is in the DNA of the United States, right? So it's not at all surprising to see this kind of sick, twisted terrorism being used by Israel itself being a US colony. Yes. Now I wanted to get to this one because this was actually shared. This was sent to me by Truth to Tweet. So want to shout out for you bringing this to my attention. Thank you so much. If y'all ever have things that you want me to cover, or I'm assuming Lee, but I don't want to speak for him. If you ever have things that you think that I should cover, feel free to tweet at me or reach out to me via my Instagram at Radical Eleanor. So this is So back in May, James Ray did a piece for Mondo Weiss talking about how there's a bill working its way through Congress to extend benefits and protections intended for U.S. veterans to Americans who serve in the IDF. Teresa, thank you so much for the super chat. Yes, Ben. Gaza is the most documented genocide in history, and the Zionists are telling us it's not happening. Reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. Exactly. Again, Amin says there's a crazy parallel between American and Israeli history, more alike in how they differ. Absolutely. I mean, settler colonies are going to settle a colony, right? That is a very obtuse sentence. Anyway, so this is a bill, again, working its way through Congress to extend benefits and protections intended for U.S. veterans to Americans who serve in the IDF. And James points out that it's important to note that not only does this extend financial benefits to U.S. citizens in the IOF, but also could punish businesses that may want to avoid the hiring, retainment, advancement, and extension of benefits to them. What the wow. So here again, when people talk about like the stranglehold that Israel has on our government, on our policy, you have our government officials. You know, look at what's happening in Appalachia. Look at what, like, does Flint even still have potable water? No. Is Hawaii still struggling after the fire? Are people starving in every state? Are there homeless children? Absolutely. But you know what we really, really need? We need American pieces of shit who are serving in the IOF committing genocide. We need to make sure that they get veteran benefits. Are you fucking kidding me? So this is, and there's a copy of the bill that people can read, like, if you really just want. I mean, I think it'd be easier to just stab your eyes with with knitting needles. But if you so choose, there is the bill here. It's HR 8445, basically to amend the United States Code and the Service Members Civil Relief Act to provide for the eligibility of U.S. citizens who serve in the Israeli Defense Forces for certain protections relating to such service. So, I mean, supposedly, these benefits are for people who sign up to fight in the US military, most of whom do so just because they want healthcare or an education. There's no official draft, but there's an economic draft. And yet they want to ensure that people who go to fight to commit genocide have access to those benefits at a time in which there are millions of Americans who can't even pay rent. And on any given night, there's almost 1 million Americans who are unhoused. But yes, this is what we need in our life right now. And in case you're wondering, in case you're like, well, Eleanor, I'd really like to know how many Americans could there possibly be serving in the IOF? Well, I've got the answer for you, my friends. An estimated 23,380 American citizens currently serve in Israeli ranks, according to the IDF itself. 23,000 pieces of shit. Now, I can't say I'm surprised that there are that many rabid genocidal Zionists. I didn't quite realize that many were that eager to go commit genocide. That's a lot. That's a lot. So this is how many people are then eligible for benefits that are supposed to be for veterans. And if you know of any veterans, which you probably do because we're always at war, then you know that veterans struggle to even get the benefits that they are supposed to have. So the idea that you could stretch those benefits further for people who are committing genocide on Israel's behalf is absolutely grotesque. Yeah, Gift Wrap says no boots on the ground. Of course, there are. And there are boots on the ground taking selfies with Netanyahu. Omar says IOF is the correct term. If people are wondering why I'm going back and forth, I'm quoting when I say IDF because it's called officially the Israeli Defense Forces, kind of like we have a Department of Defense, right? But it's really the Israeli Occupation Force, the IOF. So that's why people call it that. Also, that's why I don't call it the Department of Defense, because we don't defend against anything. An empire only extends itself and is always on the offense. Omar, thank you so much for the donation. Really appreciate it. Vegan eco-fascist, I love that name, says a lot of Americans just latch on to their narrative because they have dehumanized Arabs and they think they are untouchable and winners. Absolutely. And that narrative, that very rabid very rabid Zionist narrative is really, really strong. So I think what I want to get to right now is how it's all your fault. And then we can come back to some other stories. There's a lot going on here. And I'd like to try to get to all of it, but, you know, time is of the essence. So I want to, first of all, just to remind folks, I'm Eleanor Goldfield. I have not murdered Lee. He is fine. He is doing well. He's in Tibet. He'll be back. I'm only here for a little while. And so I'm going to try to do these like a couple of times a week. So that'll be a couple of times this week and a couple of times next week. And then he'll be back and it'll be like nothing ever happened. And you guys will be happy together again. And I will, you know, fade back into my derelict subway station here and just join you all on Fridays. So, you know, until then, bear with me and let's hang out and let's talk about voting, because today is November 4th. Tomorrow is November 5th, which I bet we're all really excited about, the most important election of our lives, right? So, okay, let's see here. Let's share screen here. And okay. So I wanted to start with this because it's a nice little transition from what I was just talking about into voting. Um, Palestine is not a single issue vote. And if you know me, you know that I love this connection between issues. I think it's really important to remember that issues don't exist in silos because there's no such thing as a life that is only one single issue, right? And we even talked about this last time with the many sides of genocide, right? How every part of someone's life is affected during genocide, right? The destruction of a culture, the destruction of schools, the destruction of urban spaces, of infrastructure, right? Like ecocide, everything, like nothing exists in a vacuum, right? And so this post is by AZ to Palestine and by CARE California. Palestine is not a single issue vote. So basically, single issue voting is basically the idea that you select a candidate based on their position on one single thing, like, let's say minimum wage or something like that. So let's start with the first one being attacks on civil rights. As Israel commits genocide in Gaza, elected officials have failed to uphold democratic values. Or I know that people will be like, we're a republic. Okay, fine. But we call it democratic values. Yes, I get that we're a constitutional republic, but we're not technically because we're an oligarchy. But the relentless attacks on the First Amendment, rights of Americans peacefully protesting nationwide in support of Palestinian human rights have been basically shat upon by the ruling class. So that's one thing. So if you care about constitutional rights, then you obviously care about what's going on in Palestine. Now, of course, a lot of people who claim they care about constitutional rights, as in right-wingers, and by that I mean a lot of Democrats too, didn't give a shit about what was happening to the protesters, the pro-Palestinian protesters, which is very on brand, right? But the second issue, the rise in hate and bias against Muslim, Palestinian, Arab communities have risen at an alarming rate. In 2024, CARE-LA saw a 500% increase in hate crimes and hate incidents. Holy wow, 500%. So True Niece says, we've always voted for genocide in America. Absolutely. And I'm going to quote W.E.B. Du Bois in a second here, but I brought up James Baldwin in a piece that I did on my podcast, Radical Nuance. When he was asked if he was going to vote for Reagan or Carter, he said, I'm going to vote for John Brown, which I love. Because it also proves that the things that matter, i.e. abolition, they're never going to be on the ballot, right? So, like, who gives a shit? Let's see here. And I would also like to just take a moment, like if anybody comes at you, which will obviously happen, if anybody comes at you and says like, what about legitimate anti-Semitism? Because legitimate anti-Semitism is a legitimate thing. Israel is the main cause of legitimate anti-Semitism. And I'm not just talking about the fact that Palestinians are indeed Semites. I'm talking about, like, let's just say anti-Jewish hate. People who see what's going on in Israel, understandably conflate, when your flag is a giant Star of David, understandably conflate Judaism with Zionism. And of course, our job, I'm speaking as a Jew, our job as Jews is to ensure that people don't make that connection and that we work as Jews to talk about the differences and act upon the differences as anti-Zionists. But there's a big reason why anti-Jewish hate has risen, and that's Israel. Israel is a cause, is the primary cause of the rise of anti-Jewish hate. So if anybody comes at you with that shit, you say, I heard it from a Jew. And I'm telling you that Israel is the main cause of anti-Jewish hate. And Sir Edward Ross says many Jews think Israel is anti-Semitic. I don't just think it. I know it. It's like, yes, it is. Um, so yeah, so the rise in hate, of course, is an issue that makes the Palestinian issue not just a single issue. Three, the misuse of tax dollars. Of course, I mean the amount of money that's been funneled to Israel is, like it's $17.9 billion in military aid just since October 2023, right? That's just in 1 year. Okay. What could that have been used for? Right. Here they say affordable housing, healthcare, education, but no, Israel needs that money to commit genocide. Fourth one, environmental impacts, right? So in June, a study published by the Social Science Research Network estimated that the harmful greenhouse gas emissions from the first 120 days of Israel's violent military campaign, this is genocide, were greater than the combined annual emissions of 26 individual countries. Again, like we covered last week, the many sides of genocide, right? Ecocide is a huge part of this. 5, the violation of domestic and international policies. Human rights organizations have well documented Israel's war crimes against Palestinians. International and U.S. law prohibits aiding foreign militaries that violate human rights. Now, that is hilarious because the U.S. is the largest terrorist organization in the world and the largest violator of human rights. But technically, we have a law. Technically, we have a law, right, that says that if you block humanitarian aid and if you are violating human rights, we can't give you military aid. Again, it's all BS because the U.S. does that all day, every day, and not just Israel. I'm talking about, pick one. But I think it's important to note those cross sections. And again, it's important to note that all of these things overlap, right? There is no such thing as a single issue that isn't affected by others. Something like if you say that, well, my primary issue is the environment. Okay, well, that also then is public health, because as the environment deteriorates, our ability to be healthy deteriorates with it. So are we then going to talk about universal health care? So it's like you can't talk about one thing without talking about all the things that are connected to it. The racist inaccessibility of healthcare, and et cetera, et cetera. The fact that the majority of super fund sites or the most toxic sites in the country are predominantly in non-white areas. I mean, I could go on. But it's really important to recognize these overlapping issues. So I told you that I was going to share this quote, and here I am sharing it because it's one of my favorites. I shall not go to the polls. I have not registered. I believe that democracy has so far disappeared in the United States that no two evils exist. There is but one evil party with two names, and it will be elected despite all it can do or say. W.E.B. Du Bois, 1956. 1956. So I'm just going to leave that out there. I'm not going to comment on that. I'm going to move on to the next slide that I wrote the other day. And so basically, I'd seen a lot of people that say that they have to vote for Harris. I just have to. Oh, I have to. I don't want to, but I have to because of trans rights or immigration or the environment or abortion or whatever, fill in the blank with some progressive thing, right? My initial question was, Harris has been, according to my understanding, has been vice president of the United States of America for 4 years. When in that time have you seen her in her vice presidential role work actively or progressively on any of those issues? On the environment, on LGBTQ issues, on immigration, on abortion, on anything. At what point has she stood up there and said, I am laying this shit down. I am saying what I need to say. This is, we need to do something about the environment. It is like the Gestapo on the border are out of control. She, in a recent like town hall or whatever, she was talking about how Trump hasn't built enough of the wall. Like, hi, what are we talking about? And so the idea that I have to vote for Harris because of fill in the blank, immigration, abortion, whatever. Like, tell me what she has done to suggest that she gives a shit about any of those issues, that she would fight for you. What? In the 4 years that she has played one of the most powerful roles in the world, has she shown you that she would fight for you? And then again, Psychology 101, people. I'm not the only person who took Psych 101, am I? Why would people change behavior when you award the shitty behavior? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Help me have it make sense. So, and then the next point, which I just basically covered, is the fact that people say that they need to vote solely based on whatever they think is the most important and forget the rest, not least of all genocide, shows a total lack of understanding of both politics and solidarity. Again, nothing happens in a vacuum. So the idea that your most important issue, and I'm not shitting on people for caring about the environment. I'm not shitting on you for caring about LGBTQ rights or kids in cages at the border. This shit is important. But to say that it exists in a vacuum says to me that you know nothing about politics, and you sure as shit know nothing about solidarity and how fighting for things work. Because it might seem like a platitude, but it's true. None of us are free until all of us are free. I can't say that, let's say that, they codified Roe versus Wade. Oh, all of a sudden I'm free. That's not how that works. That is not how that works. And by the way, they're not going to codify Roe v. Wade into law because, let me check. They could have done so at any point in the past 50 years. They don't care. It's their carrot. If they lose that kind of shit, they have no carrot. They only have the stick. And to be honest, that's all they really have. Now, the final point is, if genocide isn't a deal breaker for you, and you could say this with anything, really, if Kamala's track record on prisons is not a deal breaker for you, if what she said about Trump not having built enough of the wall, if these are not deal breakers for you, how dare you say that you're any better than the people who say that racism or misogyny, rape, or outright fascism aren't deal breakers for voting for Trump? Because people will say that, right? They'll be like, oh, I can't believe that Trump's racism isn't a red line for you. Well, genocide is not a red line for you. As the saying goes, if you want to vote for Harris, you will have to step over the dead bodies of thousands of Palestinians to do so. And then that's on you. Don't try to sugarcoat it. Don't try to twist it in some bullshit like, oh, I'm voting against Trump. That's not how a vote works. Don't double speak this shit. I wasn't born yesterday. You vote for someone. You can't vote for someone as against someone. No. Stop treating people like they're idiots. I guess some people do fall for it, but no. You do not get to try to make yourself feel better and say that you're not really voting for Harris, because you are. You are. And then all I ask is that you own it and you say that, no, genocide was not a red line for me. Her history on prisons and putting people in cages was not a red line for me. Own it. Be honest about it, because that's who you are. At least be honest about it. Okay? Gift wrap, thank you for bringing this up. Yard Rock is smarter than Holocaust Harris. I would have to agree. I don't actually know if Harris is dumb, but she sure as shit is not good. And I think Yard Rock is a good guy, I'm here for it. Mark says Democrats turned Black Lives Matter into call to fund the police. Absolutely. I think a lot of people need to be reminded Black Lives Matter started under Obama. So the idea that Democrats somehow have been there for Black folks is just untrue. Yeah, Ben says the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Yeah, and not only are you not getting a different result, I mean, if you're getting one, it's just worse, right? It's getting progressively worse, not progressively progressive, but progressively worse. Um, and uh, yeah, I'm just going to look at some of the comments here. Thank you so much for throwing your input in here. Um, do do do. Eugene Deb says, better to vote for what you want and not get it than to vote for what you don't want and get it. Yeah. I like people. So Eugene Debs, W.E.B. Du Bois, James Baldwin, these people have been dead for a minute, right? I think James Baldwin died in 1986. So we just missed sharing the earth together, I believe. But this has been the case, right? This has been the case in the United States for a long time. And people are just, as we continue to butt scoot towards fascism, it's like, how far into this cesspool do we have to, I guess all just completely in it is how far we have to get. And even then, I don't think that people will wake up. It's just more convenient not to. Truth Tweet says Obama vote shamed black men who won't vote for Harris. Yeah, absolutely. And which I always thought was, I thought that was so bizarre because it's like, why don't you vote shame white men? There are far more white male voters than there are black male voters. Like, why are you standing up there shitting on black men? That's like, hi, in case people didn't know that Obama's racist. Here you go. Like, what the hell? Talking Bag says rock the vote, vote the rock. I like it. As long as it's not like Dwayne the Rock Johnson, because there was like some talk that he was going to run for president. And I was like, wow, we are really just living idiocracy, are we not? I wanted to share some other gems from the internets to remind us all that we're not alone. This election in many ways is by far the most disgusting thing I've ever witnessed in presidential politics. It's gross, all of it. The politics, the candidates, the propaganda, the rallies, the pandering, the celebrity endorsements, the whole thing is a morally bankrupt mess. Amen. That's by Left, PhD. And this is the quote that I just mentioned. Susan Abu Hawa said, anyone voting for Kamala will have to step over tens of thousands of dead Palestinians to do so. And this was I think Lee showed this clip a while back, but Kamala Harris says that clearly and fairly succinctly that we must accept her sponsorship of the Gaza genocide as a trade-off for more affordable groceries. Yeah, and she said this when asked by in like a town hall, basically like, what do you say to voters who are like feeling upset or whatever about, what's going on? And she said, I get that, but also chicken prices. And you're like, what? And the fact that Anderson Cooper did not then press her and like, I'm sorry, are you saying, can you talk a bit more about this? Like the fact that he didn't do that says all you need to know about corporate media, right? Like they're not there to actually get anything good out of the candidates. They're there to basically butter them up. Give them a nice grease down and send them along their way. This person, the Rami writes that Harris genuinely is among the most chillingly evil people I've ever seen in my life. Straight up said, sacrifice Palestinian babies and accept genocide or your grocery bill goes up. And this is what I just mentioned about the wall. She said, how much of the wall did he build? Meaning Trump. I think the last number I saw was about 2%. And then when it came time for him to do a photo op, where did he do it? In the part of the wall that President Obama built. I mean, okay. It's like, why are you're basically just saying, yeah, Democrats hate immigrants more than you do. We're more fascist than you are. Okay. So like, where do people go who don't like fascism? Oh, just go F ourselves. Cool. Thanks. And this is what Gian Cordova writes here, that leftists are never satisfied. And thank God for that. So much good has come from leftists continuing to focus on improving the material conditions of their people and rejecting the scraps that they're tossed. And why should we why should we actually be satisfied with uh with fascism when we're anti-fascist? I just it's like I'm sorry, I'm not going to be satisfied with that. And I don't care how many women or how many non-white people they parade in front of me. I'm not falling for it, because guess what? I think the quality of human being matters, not their identity, not which box they check when they go to a doctor's office, right? There are a lot of horrible, horrible people that are not white, that are not women, that are not non-binary, that are not queer, etc. It's like you can't peddle that shit I mean, you can obviously, and people will eat it up, but not here. Go sell that shit somewhere else. We're all stocked up. Thank you. I also wanted to share, Alan McLeod does great work, and I wanted to show, I mean, this is what we're in for. This is what the title of today's live stream is all about. The New York Times recently, or not recently, this was actually last year, put out an opinion piece that said the left is dooming any hope for a Palestinian state. What? And Alan McLeod wrote, I fixed it for you in New York Times, and he crossed out the left and wrote, Israel is dooming any hope for a Palestinian state. Yeah, because look, this is what we're gonna get, you know, the left, this vague boogeyman of both the Republican and the Democratic Party, by the way. It's not just the Republicans who like to talk about the boogeyman of the left. It's both parties that hate the left. And they don't know what the left is. That's why I'm doing it in quotations, not because there isn't a left, but because they don't know what it is, right? Basically, the left to them is anybody who doesn't agree with their genocidal platform and is not willing to engage in this political farce and vote for them based on them being able to do fascism better than the other person, right? I can build a better wall. I can kill more Palestinians. Cool. I don't want any of that. Where do I go to vote? Again, just F yourself. So, let's see, where are we? Oh yeah, I wanted to share this because we've also been talking about a little bit about this kind of like the psychology here. Hannah Arendt, if you haven't read Hannah Arendt, I definitely recommend it. She spoke of the banality of evil. She said that the frightening thing about people who commit or go along with evil acts such as genocide is not that there is something unusual about them, but rather that they are so terribly and terrifyingly normal. It was this normality that was more terrifying than all the atrocities put together. I look around today and see the many people among my neighbors, my colleagues, my relatives, the politicians, and the media who support or tolerate this genocide in Palestine, and I'm terrified. Not only for Palestine, but for all of humanity. Not only for today, but for the future. And this quote was by Craig Mokiber. And I think that puts it so well. Like, we expect this kind of evil. And I think that's why a lot of people don't react, right? Don't react to like the evil that is Harris and is the Democratic Party, because they expect it to come wrapped in like a Trumpian package, right? Like, oh, evil could never come in a non-white woman, right? That, like, we wouldn't allow, the universe wouldn't allow that to happen. How could it possibly? So people think that it has to be this extraordinary thing, this extraordinary evil that is shows its face with like these, like cartoonish or like caricatured features. But no, evil is normal and banal, and it is so ingrained and woven into the fabric of the United States government and the United States project that you can't tease it out. which is also why I think the United States as an entity should not exist. But that's a separate story for another time, or one that you might have already heard me talk about. And so I think, like, with that, just, whatever y'all do tomorrow, or if you've already early voted or whatever, I'd say, like, just be ready for it all to be your fault. Right? No matter what happens, it will always be our fault. These penis wrinkles will never ever take responsibility. They will never be accountable to us, because that's not on the ballot, right? What is on the ballot is fascism, or fascism light, or fascism with like a rainbow cabinet, and I'm not just throwing the word fascism around there. Fascism, as Mussolini put it, is really just a better word would be corporatocracy. It's this far right collaboration between state and the economic forces like corporations to create an authoritarian reality. And so I think that really, like, we just have to be ready for that barrage. And remember that, like, no matter what happens, no matter who wins, we lose. And we have to keep organizing and make it very clear that whoever wins, there's not going to be any benefit to us. Right. And I said this, months ago. It's like, I really want to believe that Harris has just been hiding all of her progressive ideas. Like, and then as soon as she gets into the White House, she's just going to pop them up like a little Jack in the Box. Like, woo, I love the environment. And I think, walls are terrorism. And I think, it's like, I really wish that would be a thing that would happen. But it's like, no. As the saying goes, when people show who they are, believe them, right? And the one true thing that Biden said before his presidency began was, nothing will fundamentally change. And that is true. So I'm going to get to a couple more stories here before we wrap up here. This is actually one that I had wanted to share quite a while ago. Hundreds of migrant minors are wrongly sent to adult detention each year due to scam X-rays, rights groups say. This is, again, Orwellian and dystopian on new and exciting levels. Just before I get into this deeper, I want to share some of your comments. David says, I never thought I'd see in my lifetime the level of straight up propaganda and lies from our mainstream news channel. Yeah, I mean, it just keeps ramping up, right? Uno says Americans can't recognize fascism because they were born into it. Yeah, I mean, it's a good point that the, like the saying goes, like, whoever discovered water, it wasn't the fish. And I think that it's important to recognize, like, the amount of consistent work that it takes to combat the programming, right? And like, I work with Project Censored, which their main thing is critical media literacy. I have to continuously work on it, right? It's not like I get some kind of plaque or some kind of like, oh, you did media literacy, like, congratulations, you're done. No, this is ongoing work. Kind of like fighting these struggles is ongoing work, right? We don't get to the end of the day and say, like, oh, I'm anti-fascist, I'm done, I did the thing. Like, no, these are actions. These are continuous actions that evolve and emerge in different ways. And we have to continuously practice it, right? As a wise man once said, theory without practice ain't shit. So, and, oh, Teresa, thank you. Just ordered a zombie t-shirt from Project Censored. Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff over there. So Teresa says, Kamala can never be forgiven. She has giggled while Gaza burns. Yeah, it's really, really disturbing to see how much Harris has, like, laughed throughout the course of this. Like, it's one thing if you have like genocidal tendencies, but to then also giggle through it is an extra level of sadistic psychopathy that again, like as some folks who I shared their comments pointed out, this is a level of evil that they haven't seen in our political landscape in their lifetime. So, let's see here. And someone on the stream is asking if I'm anti-eco-fascist. I am against all fascism, and eco-fascism included in that. All fascists can go F themselves. So, this story, hundreds of migrant minors are wrongly sent to adult detention each year due to scam x-rays. Widely discredited by the scientific community's age determinations severely affect a minor's chance of obtaining immigration relief and remaining in the country. These are dental x-rays that are used to determine their age, which, yes, if that sounds like eugenics to you, you are correct. Despite its impact and scope, little is known about the practice of using dental x-rays to determine age. Federal agencies have refused to comply with Freedom of Information Act FOIA requests that seek to learn under what circumstances and how often dental and bone x-rays determine the age of unaccompanied minors. Now, just a little bit of backstory here. So one of the things that Biden did was he said that he was like, he basically blocked the border from refugees. And he said, after he made that really, really right-wing decision, he said, well, one of the things that I'm not going to do is I'm not going to separate families, which, yes, you are, because Obama did that too. But what is so extra, and this is oftentimes why I shit on the Democrats more so than the Republicans, is because the Republicans are straight up about it. They're like, yeah, we separate families. I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry, I'm not sorry. The Democrats say, we would never do that. And then what they do is they do these kind of policies that separate families in like new and terroristic ways. So for instance, with this bill that Biden did, was basically he ensured that people couldn't get across the border, but they left a loophole open for unaccompanied minors. So what this means is that people who are coming with their children will push their children across the border so that they become unaccompanied because they want to try to get them across the border to safety. And I'm saying this as somebody who has heard it firsthand from people who have been down at the border and literally watched parents hug their children, not knowing if they will ever see them again, just so they can get across the border. They have forced people to give up their children to the largest terrorist organization in the world, the United States, in hopes that they might survive because they are not sure that they will. How sick and twisted is that? And here's the thing, they know that they're doing that. They don't think, they don't think that this is not like a surprise to them. They know exactly what their policies do. They know exactly what they do. And Democrats, unlike Republicans, pretend that it's a good thing. They pretend that it's something else, while Republicans are just like, yes, this is the thing that we do. So which one do you think is more twisted? So, and of course, unaccompanied minors also often don't have ID because, I mean, when you were 12, did you? No, also, even if they're older. So what the Gestapo of the borderlands have been doing is doing dental x-rays. Now, according again to our own laws, to make an age determination, the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act requires multiple forms of evidence. However, advocates claim that the bone and dental x-rays or radiographs have been the only way that they've been determining a minor's age, despite only producing estimates of plus or minus 3 years, which plus or minus 3 years doesn't sound like a lot when you're my age, but when you're 15, that's a big deal. Between 2014 and 2023, more than 6,000 unaccompanied minors under the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement were deemed to be adults after undergoing age determination processes. In our experience, kids from Eastern African countries like Somalia and Eritrea as well as from Southeast Asian countries like India and Bangladesh, have been disproportionately subjected to this process. So they are basically forcing these unaccompanied minors who, as I mentioned, have been accompanied at one point, many of them. They're forcing them to do this eugenics type shit with the x-rays. Then they get it wrong. And then they bus them to an adult detention center. And not so unrelated, let's see here, not so unrelated to that, a watchdog group found, this is an article from February of this year. Watchdog group finds gaps in how federal government vetted the sponsors who migrant kids were sent to live with. So basically, you have a lot of kids then being trafficked because those who are deemed to be minors are just sent to people or sent to child labor situations. Are funneled into the large human trafficking ring that the United States is undeniably a part of. I mean, and this is all going on at the border under a Democratic president. I repeat, under a Democratic president. And back already in 2008, a congressional committee called federal agencies to cease their reliance on dental x-rays to determine the age of a child, as this was, quote, fallible forensic evidence that has led to the erroneous placement of children in adult facilities. And recent peer review studies confirm that the method is flawed and unable to provide reliable information to determine if an individual is a minor. Regardless, the practice continues. So, I mean, and there's a lot there's a lot of things that go into, and they continue here, like to estimate the age of an African minor, for example. Analyses often rely on African American growth charts, regardless of the factors that distinguish these populations' development, such as nutrition, exposure to germs and viruses, body weight, hormones, and genetics. So they compare them of African migrants to African Americans when these lived experiences look nothing alike, right? How can you possibly suggest that you'd have a legitimate idea of the age, right? So the methods that they're using are racist and they don't work. They're unethical. It's eugenics. It's creepy as shit. This is, as one person put, that this smacks of discredited race science. And of course, and this is a point that has been made by myself and others in terms of AI, you can't build systems outside of the systems that build them. So AI is going to be racist. Why? Because a racist society built it, right? You can't separate the two. So these methods are racist. Why? Because the US is a white supremacist nation state. You can't tease them apart. Teresa writes, not caring about children in Gaza is a good indication that you're not going to care about any children. Exactly. I oftentimes say that imperialism is a home game. And so the idea that somehow we would care about the fate of children in the US, whether they're migrant children or not, is absurd, right? Yeah, so I see that we are past the hour. But yeah, I wanted to share that final story because, again, as Teresa just pointed out, these things are all interconnected, right? If seeing countless mutilated children's bodies in Gaza does not stop you from wanting to not just help Israel commit genocide, but do it yourself with boots on the ground, why would you care about the fact that kids crossing the border into the United States are being child trafficked, are ending up in child labor camps, are being forced into adult detention centers, which, by the way, adult detention centers should also not exist. So kids in cages, adults in cages, none of it should be a thing. But yeah, and so again, this just things to think about when when you go to the polls, if you've already gone to the polls, what have you. I think that these are all things that we have to remember, and to remember that like we are going to get called out. We are going to get blamed no matter what happens. But and this is going to sound corny, but we have to have each other. Not we have each other, because I think a lot of times we don't in this country, but we need to. Like if you see what's going on in Appalachia with people really like grasping onto and building up and supporting these grassroots solidarity movements where they are really like showing up for each other in the dearth of government support. That's what we have to do. Don't wait for shit to hit the fan. It's already hitting the fan. If you haven't been affected by it, that's just dumb luck. So we need to build these networks now. And if not build them, then continue supporting the growth of them, et cetera, et cetera. That is vital, because the government will not have your back no matter who wins. We all lose, and we're going to get blamed for the fallout. And by we, I mean predominantly the left. It's going to somehow be our fault. It's going to be Jill Stein's fault, or Susan Sarandon, or Claudia de la Cruz, or whatever. Fill in the blank. Somebody who cares about the fact that there's a genocide happening is going to be blamed. Okay. Look out for your neighbors, especially in these times. I think Muslim neighbors, Arab neighbors, non-white neighbors, look out for them, because no matter, again, who wins, this is a white supremacist nation, right? And it's always hated anybody who's not white, male, straight, cis, Christian. So just, let's remember this, and let's show up for those folks in whatever ways that we can. And until next time, I will do another one of these this week. It'll likely be, I want to say Thursday, but we'll see. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your hearts tomorrow and every day. One final thing before we leave. If you haven't checked out this really wonderful outlet, I definitely recommend it. It's called the New York War Crimes, and it's a great satirical, but also really beautiful. They highlight, and they have writing by Palestinians. It's a beautiful, beautiful, and oftentimes funny like site and paper. I think they do they print actual papers as well. And they have a link for you to unsubscribe from the New York Times. So if you know anybody who's still addicted to that shit rag that should only be used as toilet paper and proof of life, please let them know about the New York War Crimes. It's at newyorkwarcrimes.com. And yeah, that's all I have for you all today. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.